Hi class, we're looking at solving multi-step inequality equations with variables on one side and both sides. Let's get started. These problems require you to use all of the rules that we set forward in the last 3 lessons. Okay? The only difference between inequalities and solving equations is that you have the inequality symbol, as we see here in the first problem example, and when we divide and multiply by negatives, we have to remember to flip that inequality sign. Other than that, you're solving the inequalities the same way you do equations. So here we have 5 plus 4b is less than 21. If this were an equation, remember, assume this is an equal sign, you would first isolate the letter by subtracting 5 from both sides. You'd then be left with 4b is less than 16. In order to solve for b, you would divide both sides by 4, and you'd be left with b is less than 4. Now, if we were to graph that on a number line, okay, you don't have to have a fancy number line, remember. Here's my 4. b is less than 4, which means it's not going to be equal to 4. Open circle, going to the left. So 0 could be one of my answers. A good check will be to pick one of your answers from your solution and double check your results. So if I plug 0 in for b, I end up getting 5 plus 4 times 0, which is 0, should be less than 21 if I did this correctly. And 5 is less than 21, and that's a great quick check to make sure that you did the problem correctly. Moving on to example 2. Example 2, again, we have an inequality here, and just like equations, we'll have to distribute and combine like terms first. So let's take the 3x plus 4 times 6, which is 24, minus 4 times x, which is 4x, is less than 2. I then combine like terms, and I end up getting 24 minus 1x, and again, that x, I put the 1 there, you don't have to, should be less than 2. I'm now going to subtract 24 from both sides, and I'm left with a negative 1x is less than negative 22. Now in my next step here, I need to divide by a negative 1. I'm dividing both sides by a negative 1. And like yesterday when we talked about if I divide by a negative 1, I have to remember I need to flip that inequality. So my original inequality was a less than sign, so now it's going to be a greater because I divided both sides by a negative, and I'm left with x is greater than 22. Let's check and see how that works. So let's pick a nice, easy number that I can work with that's greater than 22. Let's go big, 100. So 3 times 100 plus 4 times the quantity 6 minus 100 is less than 2. Okay, maybe I didn't pick a great number to work with here, but let's try and see if it works. I don't know if it's going to. We have 300 plus, this is 4 times 6 is 24, right? Minus 4 times 100 is going to give me minus 400. Should be less than 2. Well, if I start to add this up, I get 324 minus 400, which then gives me minus 76, which is less than 2. So I have checked that, and I do know this is accurate, okay? Moving on to the third example. With this inequality, you want to, again, distribute and combine like terms. It's a big equation. Just work it the same way you have in the past, taking your time and showing all of your steps. So we're going to first of all distribute the 5 to the minus 3, which we get minus 15, plus the 5 times the d, which gives us 5d. That is going to be less than or equal to 3 times 3d, which is 9d, minus 3 times 2, which is 6. Combining like terms, I'm going to subtract 5d from both sides. That's my first step. Some of you may do this a little differently, but I think your results should be the same. Minus 15 is left on the left side. We have a less than or equal to 4d minus 6. Now I'm going to add 6 to both sides so that my variable is left on the right. I add 6 to both sides, and I'm left with a negative 9 is less than or equal to 4d. Not going to be a pretty answer, is it? It's okay. We can then divide both sides by negative 9. Excuse me. Scratch that. Divide both sides by a positive 4. We're dividing both sides by a positive 4 to isolate the variable. Now, we didn't divide both sides by a negative number, so there's no need to flip the inequality here. Only when we divide both sides or multiply both sides by a negative number do we need to flip this inequality. So we now have negative 9/4, and let's just leave that the fraction. Don't worry about converting it to a decimal or a mixed number. It's just one extra step that's not necessary 99% of the time, and it's usually a step that will cause some problems and possibly mistakes. So we have negative 9/4 is less than or equal to d, which means d is greater than or equal to negative 9/4. So what could d be? Let's say d is 0. If you think about the graph for this, here's our number line, here's 0, and then here is negative 9/4. So d is going to be greater than or equal to, so we would have our closed circle here on the negative 9/4, and it's going to the right. So 0 is one of my solutions. Let's just quickly go back to our original problem, okay? And you always go back to the original problem in case you copied something wrong. Place a 0 in for both d's. We then, if we place a 0 in for both d's, we get 5 times negative 3, which gives me negative 15. Negative 15 on the left should be less than or equal to, if I make this a 0, okay, I make this a 0 here because 3 times 0 is 0, minus 2. I end up getting a minus 2 or a negative 2 inside this parentheses, and then I multiply it by 3 and I get negative 6. Is negative 6 greater than negative 15? Is negative 15 less than or equal to negative 6? That is true. Remember, the larger the negative number, the smaller it actually is. So in this case, we've just used 0. And again, pick easy numbers to double check your work. Sometimes you can do the math in your head pretty quickly, and just prove to yourself and double check your work that your result is accurate. And here we can see that d should be greater than or equal to negative 9/4. Great job today. I will see you in class on Monday.